So before I start on talking about it, we were in DC yesterday too, and I think, the Women's March after the election, the Climate March, yesterday there were hundreds of thousands of people there, and it's exactly as you described. It's going, right? We're moving in the right direction. I can feel it. The right side of history, which we are on, is happening. It's palpable and it's real, and we're going to take our country back this year. I firmly believe that. And yesterday was so inspiring. You just couldn't help but just know that this is it. We finally are going to get some real change in this gun nuts that we have. We've been following the NRA's, leadership or lack thereof for 15 years now, and look where it's led us. And these kids, who I think the difference between now and Newtown is that these are teenagers, and they can talk, and they have been, and they're not corrupted, and they're not corruptible, and they're leading the way, and it's inspiring. I think we're going to get something done. So I wanted to just close that loop on there, because I really, yesterday was an inspiring day. So a little bit about kind of who I am, why I'm doing it. Listen, y'all, I was born in Alabama. I was number 3 of three boys. My parents divorced when I was about 3 years old. My mom married a man who had 4 boys. And they moved to a small farm in Tennessee. And we had 7 boys in a 2-room log cabin built in the 1850s. It was downstairs in the loft, and the 7 boys were in the loft. The first year we were there, we literally didn't have running water. We went to the spring, we brought buckets in, and that's what we did. And eventually we got a well witch. Y'all know who knows what a well witch is? We did. And found the water, and backhoe came in, and we put the pump, and that's what we did for water. We grew tobacco, and we raised cattle. Now we had a roof over our head, and we had plenty of food in our stomach, and we had love in the house. But we had to make our own way in life. In 1980, we moved to Virginia, Madison County. We continued kind of the agriculture. I used to show steers in Culpeper. And I didn't do very well in school when I first got there. And there's a teacher, his name is Charles Carter, who, rather than running me out and running me down, gave me a second chance and became a mentor. And I started doing well in school at that point, and I earned a scholarship, and that's how I paid for my college. But because of that scholarship, I owe the Marine Corps service. And as Catherine mentioned, I spent 25 years in the Marine Corps. I flew attack jets, and by 2008, I had left active duty. I was in the Marine Corps Reserves, and I was a new hire pilot at Continental Airlines. Like many Americans in 2008, I lost my job. I was furloughed. And we were losing 750,000 jobs a month for that year. That's what President Obama walked into. I thought we were on the verge of a depression. You know what? And I was on unemployment. I understand what the social safety net, the democratic policies have provided this country, because I've been there. We had to make a choice. Do we pay our mortgage, or do we buy health insurance? Because I couldn't afford both. If the Affordable Care Act had been in place in 2008, I wouldn't have had to make that choice. And yet we have Mr. Bratt, who's been his entire time there to repeal the Affordable Care Act so he could enrich Wall Street, who caused the crash to begin with. 2009, our savings was gone. I went back active duty in the Marine Corps, and this is where I think necessity is the mother of all invention, I say often, and I started excelling, and not with my hands, it was with my head. I was working in embassies throughout Eastern Europe, and my follow-on assignment led me to President Obama's State Department, where I was a senior military advisor. I ran programs that supplied the Free Syrian Army. I led the first Department of Defense, Department of State cooperative planning process on the instability in North Korea. And when the Russians invaded Ukraine in 2014, my boss, the Undersecretary, sent me to the embassy in Kyiv, Ukraine, to rewrite their security assistance budget. And one of the first names that came across my desk in 2014 was Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort worked for Viktor Yanukovych, and Viktor Yanukovych worked for Vladimir Putin. This is 2 years before he became Donald Trump's campaign manager. Colonel Ward knew who he was in 2014. You can bet your bottom dollar that the Republicans knew who he was when they hired him as a campaign manager. Folks, the Constitution can handle a presidency like this one, but it requires Congress not be complicit, and this Congress is complicit. And Dave Brat is a yes man to Donald Trump. If you need any more evidence, look no further than this $1.5 trillion tax cut to the donor class. It's little more than a down payment on this year's elections. Dave Brat, who he really works for, folks, his lone legislative accomplishment is the renaming of an arboretum. That's what he's done in 4 years. He's done a lot of co-sponsoring, but most of that co-sponsoring goes to benefit Dominion, the Koch brothers, and the NRA, because that's who he's really working for. So instead of working for Dominion, he needs to be worried about the kids sitting in the parking lot in Louisa County doing their homework at McDonald's because they don't have internet at home. You know, instead of working for the Koch brothers, he needs to be worried about the KKK pamphlets that are getting put in people's driveways in Spotsylvania County. He's not doing it. Instead of working for the NRA, he needs to be worried about kids getting gunned down in school. Because we got to do something about it. And folks, I promise you, I'm a doer. And one of the first things I'm going to do, if I am so fortunate to get to Washington, D.C., is I'm going to advocate for the repeal of that tax giveaway to the donor class. Because that money needs to be spent right here. That money needs to be spent right here in Powhatan County, and in Louisa County, and in Orange County, and Culpeper County, on roads and bridges, on skilled labor training, on broadband cooperative. Folks, we need to have a cooperative like the electric cooperative of the 1930s, except for it needs to be on broadband because, listen, I live in Orange, and there are large swaths of Orange County where there's no cell service and there's no broadband, and how are our best and brightest going to compete in the 21st century economy if we can't educate them? We are not Henrico. We are not Chesterfield. We don't have the ability to raise $272 million in a bond to go to schools. We can't afford it. And that money needs to go to the rural parts of this country and this district. It's not just the 7th. I think it's the entire country. There is a large swath of Donald Trump supporters who are in the rural parts of this country because, well, there's the racist element. Those guys can go away. I don't care. But there's also an element of folks who are being left behind, and they know it, and they're desperate. And they got sold a bill of goods by a charlatan. But we have to start addressing those people's concerns. Because if we don't, we're going to lose them. And we have to bring people up. We have to. This is where we need to be spending the money. And it's on education. It's on infrastructure. It's on skilled labor training. Because there are plenty of jobs out there if you have the right skill set. But we're not teaching that skill set. And we need to be building schools, vocational schools, job training centers to teach those types of skill sets. Because if we do that, this is how we're going to bring the rural community up to the suburban and the urban parts of this country. That's really where I focus on. That's what I think I bring to the table is an understanding of the rural parts of this district. Because if we don't, y'all, we all have friends and neighbors. You know what I'm talking about. And we have to reach out a hand to those folks. We have to listen to their concerns about whether it's Second Amendment, whether it's abortion, or whatever single issue it is. Listen to it, and then let's go start talking about health care. And let's start talking about infrastructure. Let's start talking about education. And maybe if we can get 4% of those folks, that's how we're going to win this race. Because that's what the statistics say. Ralph Northam lost by 3.5 points in the 7th. We need to get 4% of the people that voted for Ed Gillespie to vote for the winner of this primary. And I think that that's the path forward. And I look forward to talking to those people. Because I think we have a lot more in common than we don't. And we just have to be able to get through that exterior hardness. So with that, that's kind of who I am and why I'm running. I am doing this for the right reasons. I think we need people in Congress who are there to serve and not be served. I think we need people in Congress who are going to make the hard vote and is going to uphold their co-equal branch of government responsibilities. that has been lacking for a long time. And when you're honest about why you're doing something, it frees you up to be honest and answer questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Y'all fire away. Yes, ma'am.
How would you make affordable care more affordable for people that have?
So my idea in healthcare right now is I think we need to, first off, repealing the tax cut will put the mandate back in place, and that's going to stabilize it quite a bit. We need to start funding the Affordable Care Act, and the state governments need to get the Medicaid expansion in ASAP, because the Medicaid expansion really is the key to, particularly in rural areas where the hospitals are closing. It's the states that did not do Medicaid expansion is where they're really closing. So if we can get here in Virginia, get that done, that'll stabilize it as well. What I also support is Senator Kane's Medicare X, which is the ability for people, particularly it starts out in the rural areas, to buy into government health care. It's a single payer. It allows you to buy that health care from the government, and regardless of what age you are, and you can use that insurance. Because Churchill once said, you know, Americans exhaust every option until they get to the right answer. We all know the right answer is going to be single payer, because that's the only way we can afford it. It's going to break our country otherwise, financially. We spend twice what Germany does on healthcare, our government per person, and yet we don't even have universal healthcare. We have too many hands in the cookie jar in this existing system, but I think the way we lead people there so we don't have the disaster of 2010 where we lost 63 seats in the House of Representatives when we passed the Affordable Care Act, is we lead them there. Give them a taste of what government healthcare is like, and then they find out it's not the boogeyman. And they like it, and then that's how we lead it to the single payer system, which will really help the solvency of our government. Folks, we are running a $1.1 trillion deficit this year, largely because of that tax cut, and the economy is strong. I really worry about what it's going to be when we go into a recession, and we all should be worried about it. And healthcare is one of the largest drivers of deficits going forward on our government, and I think that that's the best way to do it. So let's reinforce the Affordable Care Act by repealing that tax cut, putting the individual mandate back in place. Let's make Medicare X available so people can buy into government health care, and then let's lead the country forward to a point where we can get to a single payer, we can pass it, and people won't hold us accountable like they did in 2010. And I shouldn't, accountable is not the right word. The Republicans ran a pretty remarkable marketing campaign against us in 2010, and we're still paying for it. I mean, let's not kid ourselves, y'all. 2010, across the country, the Republicans won state house after state house after state house. It was the last census. So in 2011, when they redrew the lines, that's when the gerrymandering went in full effect. And we are still feeling the effects of that. We cannot give them that opportunity again. We have to be smarter in how we do this, but we have to do it. That's a long answer. Sorry about that. Sir?
Don't you think, like, given that the House of Representatives is likely to flip to the Democrats, more than likely, your best argument for getting that 4%, probably even closer to 6%, in this county in particular, be on the Problem Solvers Caucus and be on the leadership rather than the minority, given the House is going to flip, and solve some things, maybe be on the committees that Dave Bratt should have been on, or maybe he is on, and present yourself as a solver.
That's right. No, listen, I'm out front, I'm on the record. I want to be on transportation and infrastructure. Because I think that that's the best way we can get funding from the federal government to this district. Particularly the rural parts of this district where I think the infrastructure needs to be addressed. The average bridge age in this country is 43 years. The average life expectancy of bridges is 50. The bill's coming due. These things are going to start collapsing. And we have to start funding our infrastructure. We've neglected it for far too long. But to your point, yes, problem solved, but also be willing to make a hard vote. Wouldn't it be refreshing if we had people actually, you know, for example, the use of authorization of military force, use of military force. We're still using 2001 authorizations. I think Donald Trump might attack Iran based on 2001 authorization, and Congress needs to do something about that ASAP.
If you knock off Dave Bratt, though, this is a big seat,
Yeah.
and you could probably pick your spot. Ways and Means, for example, take his little slot on the small business, and call the ball in many cases for what the House wants to lead. I think.
As a freshman,
Because there's no
Ways and
money.
Means is, I think they call it a committee, and it's a tough one to get on. T&I think is more realistic, and it's also, I think you can, I'm familiar with T&I from my work at Woodland Hill. I've spent 3 years at the State Department doing mostly armed service and foreign affairs. But then when I retired, I started working for the Airline Pilots Association, done legislative work inside transportation infrastructure. So I'm pretty familiar with who those folks are. I know them, legitimately know them. And I think it's a committee that I realistically could get on. You're right, Ways and Means would be ideal, but I think there's going to be a lineup to get on that one.
It's a big seat.
It is a big seat. But, I think you just gotta, I think we're gonna win. This seat's gonna be, it's just difficult. It's gonna be a tough seat to win. You're right, it's in R6, but the statistics with Ralph Northam was 3.5. And Ralph did not campaign very much in this district. So we think we can do better. Sir?
I'd like to ask a question about the VA and what do we do to fix it? I mean, Brad wants to privatize it. And the people that I've known that have dealt with it, the biggest problem was the accessibility and not getting there. The ones that have been enrolled are pleased with it for the most part.
That's right, that's right.
But, when I went over to enroll, the computers are so old, it takes hours just to get into the system. And they're working with 20-year-old computers and stuff. What do we need to do to fix it?
Well, so I think that's a great question, and there are efficiencies that certainly can be made in the VA, but I am not for privatizing the VA, not at all, because when this country decides to go to war, it doesn't just buy those soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen for the duration of that war. You've bought them for a lifetime, because there are illnesses that come with combat. And the VA is particularly specialized in handling those types of illnesses. The private hospital in wherever is not going to know how to do that like the VA does. And veterans, there's been a remarkable marketing campaign, because the Republicans are really good at marketing, to tear down the credibility of the VA. Now, the VA does need to be more efficient. You're right, the systems need to be updated, and that goes across the federal government. I mean, when I retired from the Marine Corps and my medical was switched over to the VA, my wife and 2 children mysteriously dropped from my life, even though they were there through 95% of my career. And I had to reapply to have them put back into my record at the VA. It took 2 years to do that.
Wow.
Because the two systems don't talk to each other. So those are the types of efficiencies that need to happen. And also, I believe that there are 4 VA hospitals in New York City. There needs to be one big one. Maintaining 4 different buildings is inefficient. Those are the types of efficiencies I think that the VA needs to have. But at the same time, I'm not for privatizing. I think, guys, you can take the Republican playbook. At its core, it's about taking your money and giving it to the private sector, to their donors. That is the basic line of what they're here for. And they all put a marketing spin on it to make it sound good, but that's really what they're for. They want to take that almost $200 billion budget at the VA, I believe is what it is, and they want to hand that out to their buddies so they can get more money to run their elections. But no, the VA gives good care. It does, it can, of course, be improved, and they need to be in better sync with the Department of Defense in that transition from active to veteran. And that needs to happen ASAP. But don't discount intentional, it's like the immigration system. I believe they don't want to fix the immigration system because it allows them to run a campaign on it. If you fix problems, they can't run on it anymore. These guys are more interested in staying in power than they are in getting problems solved. So always keep that in mind when you get frustrated about an issue. Why aren't they doing something? That is probably the answer, because they don't want to do something about it. Because that way, let's get our Dave Brat, our own Dave Brat, won the 2014 election because of immigration. He did. He took Sebastian Gorka, Steve Bannon, and Laura Ingraham, and they ran it on immigration, and that's how he won. It is almost, But he doesn't want to fix it because I guarantee he's going to go back to that playbook this year, 100%. So I know it's a long answer on that one too. So
One of the other problems is there needs to be some type of pipeline that for people that are not close to a VA hospital to get them to the help they need. I mean, you either got to go to Roanoke or Richmond.
yeah,
If you live in Cumberland or Appomattox,
a long ways.
it's hard. And there needs to be some type of pipeline to integrate them into the system that they need to get into.
That doesn't sound like it would be that hard either. Transportation is what you're saying, to and from, right?
Or referral from other.
You know, I wonder, I mean, this is just me thinking out loud here. If we did get to a single payer option, at what point, how does the VA, who actually, by the way, the VA does get to negotiate for prescription medication, and that's why the prices are so much lower. We could take a lot of cues from the VA on that. But at what point is the whole system get put together? You know what I mean? And it's just kind of fanciful thought on my part. But I think the VA is probably the closest thing we have to where I think we're going to end up going towards the single payer. That's right. Sir?
You mentioned you would repeal the Republican tax cut.
That's right.
What else beyond that needs to be done in order to fund infrastructure, et cetera?
Well, so that $1.5 trillion works out to about $20,000 per household in this country. We all know we didn't get a $20,000 tax cut. So we know where that money's really going. If we're going to put $1.5 trillion on the credit card, President Obama tried to get a $1 trillion infrastructure bill his last 5 years as president. And the Republicans blocked it every single time. This proposal that they have on infrastructure right now is going to be tolls. And we know a toll is a regressive tax. It's going to be paid for by the people who can least afford it. And it's not a real infrastructure plan. I think that money needs to go right back into the infrastructure, particularly here in the rural parts of the country. And that's going to be jobs too, folks. Every dollar will get recycled into the economy that's spent on infrastructure bills. The $171 billion of that $1.5 trillion tax cut, stock buybacks. That's where it went to, stock buybacks. $171 billion. It is offensive. And these corporations have been making, money hand over fist. They've been getting 0% money now for almost a decade. I guess it's going up a little bit now because we were kind of concerned about inflation. But the thought that we need to reinvest in those companies who've been killing it for the last decade. To me is offensive. When the middle class and the working people of this country have been getting squeezed and we're disappearing, and we have to start focusing on it. If we don't, we really are going to lose it. That was 100% recycle. The folks that are getting those dividends, that money, a lot of us getting parked overseas. It's not going right back into this country. So I think we got to redo that. What was the other part of your question? Was just the tax cut? Also just the repealing of the individual the mandate.
Setting us back to where we were, is there more reform that's needed in the tax code?
So in the tax, yes, the tax code does need to be reformed. The corporate tax rate was 35, now it's 21. The real corporate tax rate, when it was 35, was actually 21. They dropped it from 35 to 21 and didn't close any of the loopholes. So I'm curious to find out what the real corporate tax rate is going to be. I'm guessing 13, 14. That's my guess. It sure is going to be low. So if we're going to, we do need to go from 35, it needed to be lower, but we also need to close up those loopholes. So companies like Boeing, who has paid 1.3% this century, That's what the tax, that's what they paid. It's 1.3%. GE isn't much different. So those companies, we have to close those loopholes so those folks are doing their fair share. Companies, the percentage of revenue to the federal coffers from corporations has been a steady decline. And it's time, we got to figure out what's fair. And they got to start paying their fair share. Because I know I'm paying my fair share. I'm literally paying, you know, if you add everything up, I'm in the 40s. With federal, state, property, sales, all of it. And so, you know, why am I paying 40-some% and Boeing's paying 1.3%? We know that they're making money hand over fist. In fact, Kevin came up with a statistic that in this last budget, more money is going to be spent on Lockheed than at the State Department. Those are real numbers. And that should scare you. You know, I'm sorry, I'm going to digress here a little bit on that because I worked at the State Department, and I've got a lot of friends there who are very senior people at the State Department, and the stories that they're telling me is frightening. Because listen, diplomacy and war are on the same political spectrum. When you remove diplomacy, that leaves you with war to solve problems. And you know, we've got a lot of chicken hawks in Congress right now, and John Bolton is the biggest chicken hawk of all. Now that guy is a dangerous person, and that's firsthand. And we should all, listen, we need to demand that Congress start upholding their War Act authorizations. Because we need a check on people like Bolton. I'm telling you, I'm really worried about a strike on Iran. I really am. I don't think Korea is I think Korea is the distraction. I think it's Iran. That's my personal opinion. We'll see what happens. But I'm worried about it. And so just kind of keep that out. But I think we as citizens need to demand of our Congress people that they need to reauthorize the use of military force, and it needs to be very clear what they can and cannot do. With people like Bolton in there now, we need that.
Time for one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
Dan, with the recent marches and everything, how do you think we should approach gun control? And you know, what is your philosophy as far as how you run on that topic?
You know, I struggled with that when we first started talking about it. It was right after Parkland. Tom, we had a colleague whose daughter was killed at Parkland. I don't know if you know that. And, you know, the political expedient thing to do, knowing this district is, okay, let's go with universal background checks, let's do the standard, you know. But my conscience couldn't allow me to do that because I know what's right and what's wrong. And we have allowed the NRA to dictate this issue for far too long. And that organization is nothing more than a shill for the gun manufacturers and ammo manufacturers. They have lost their way. The NRA they taught me, I got my hunting license when I was 10 from the NRA. They used to teach you how to handle a weapon, how to hunt, how to do things safely. At some point they lost their way. And we need to take that power and responsibility away from them. There's even talk that there's probably Russian money involved in NRA right now. And it would not surprise me at all if that came out to be actually factual. So I think universal background checks, yes. Assault weapons ban going back to 2004, yes. If you already have an assault weapon, you need to go to the gun range and you can go shoot your weapon, clean it just like I did in the Marine Corps, have fun with it, and you put it back in the armory and then you go home. And that's how you can safely have your weapon, shoot it, and it's not a menace to society. I know that's not the political expedient thing to say, but it's the right thing to do. And I think that, you know, upwards of 800,000 people showed up yesterday in Washington, D.C. I think there's a lot of people that agree with that assessment. So that's where I am on it. Yeah. Okay, thank y'all. I appreciate it.